Thank you. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining the session about Azure AD. It's a great pleasure to be part of this virtual event. And before we start, I'd like to thank all or everyone that is involved for organizing this global community event, and also for the sponsors, for their support. My name is Thomas Naunheim. I'm a cloud engineer and working for an insurance company in Koblenz, Germany. And I'm very excited to share my experience with the field, from the field with the Azure community, like in this session. And you'll find also the slides of my talk and further information about Azure AD security on my blog, as you can see here in the slide. Yeah, feel free to follow me on Twitter or get in touch via mail. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. I think we have a couple of minutes after the session to answer some questions. Yeah, I guess we can start. And before we go into details, let's discuss a few major points that you should consider in your identity security strategy of Azure AD. Because especially if you like to implement a hybrid identity environment, keep in mind hybrid identity means also to protect your on-premises identity infrastructure. And therefore, you should make sure that your Active Directory environment is secure and that your hybrid identity components, such as Azure AD Connect, are protected like your crown jewels. So maybe you have additional security policies for your domain controller, so you should cover them to the hybrid identity components as well. And it's very important that your tenant is secure right from the start. So please consider the best practices and recommendations by Microsoft. It's a great start or a good way to analyze the security configuration by the Identity Secure Score. But as you may have heard about that before, the default security settings are introduced by Microsoft, I think a few months ago. But I really strongly recommend it to build your own conditional access strategy. And if you have not the time to build your own strategy, it's a better way to create the common policies that are also very well documented by Microsoft. I think they have some benefits over the default security setting, like you have the option to exclude user accounts, for example, the emergency access account that you need, and you can build a resiliency access strategy in conditional access. And also, hybrid identity has some additional challenges. For example, you have to consider the options about authentication. In general, password hash sync is strongly recommended to use, but especially if you have some security policies on premises, like logout policies, or you have other things. If AD is not responsible for primary authentication, like in the use case of ADFS or PDA, you must consider some use cases. For example, forced password change on next logon is just enabling as a private preview, as a public preview feature in Azure AD, and disabling accounts in the use case of password hash sync has some delays because it's just affected after the next synchronization process. And if you implement hybrid identity, keep in mind that you scope your synchronization so that you only synchronize accounts that are needed in the cloud, and consider that you have just a few writeback operations. So if you have no password writeback, it makes no sense that your Azure AD Connect service account has this high privileges in your AD on premises. And Azure AD is built out of the box by many self-services. So you have the chance to delegate many services to your users, but you should also consider that this has some considerations. So you should have a governance for these services, like the self-service password reset. And please make sure that you have a concept for privileged access for your cloud workloads, because there are some recommendations to use cloud-only accounts for your privileged identities, for example. And of course, you should have an active security monitoring in place. So integrate your Azure AD logs with your existing SIEM is one of the things that you should take care of by the implementation. With that all in mind, this could be a solid security baseline for your Azure AD tenant. And I think that was just a short overview about some key points that you should consider if you like to implement hybrid identities, and you should include them in your Azure AD deployment plannings. For me, it was hard to choose a few certain topics that we can discuss in details in this session, but I guess the following subjectives could be interesting for you. For example, identity protection and strong authentication. So how we can protect our Azure AD identities and reduce risk of password-based authentication. But also how we can build our conditional access strategy and a strong baseline for that reduce the attack surface. And on top of the previous solution, we will take a look on advanced options for investigation and detection of identity threats. So I think really full-packed session, but really interesting topics. So let's start with identity protection. And the question is, what is Microsoft's end-to-end solution to protect your identities? And it's important to understand there are three different services or products, like Azure AD Identity Protection with a focus on protecting your Azure AD sign-ins, and your user risk will be managed with identity protection. Azure ATP, which has more focus on detecting and investigation attacks from your Active Directory environment, so on premises, and more covering traditional attack methods like pass the hash. And with Microsoft Cloud App Security, MCAS, we have Microsoft's Cloud Session Broker, which protects your cloud app sessions and the access within the session. And this is very important because you have the option to detect unusual identity behavior within the session and across different platforms and after the sign-in. And it's also important to know that all of these three products come together, and Microsoft introduced the investigation priority engine that pulls all the signals together and the data from these solutions. And you have the option to see the activities and events that are added to an investigation score, and the SecOps is able to identify which account should be most under attack and go for further investigation. So let's have a deep look on identity protection, especially in use cases of Azure AD. So how works identity protection? So you get the service that checks sign-in real time with several real-time detections, like looking for unfamiliar sign-in properties, or if the user is coming from an anonymous IP. But you have also some offline detection. That means we have detections that need forward information that are not available to the sign-in, or there's any additional calculation time needed. So on the one hand, we've got real-time detection. That means the user will be checked before they get the token, and offline detections working more in a way that the risk will be aggregated later on to the sign-in specific risk, because as you can see here in this overview, every of these detections are in a relation to a sign-in event. And in the end, we have a calculation of a sign-in risk. So that defines the probability that the sign-in is compromised. But if the sign-in is not risky, the user will access to cloud apps, and that's the point where MCAS comes into the play. So MCAS is looking for the behavior within the session. For example, if there's a suspicious inbox manipulation or impossible travel by various session activities. And on the other side, we have detections that are not linked to a specific sign-in event and has more an identification about that the identity is compromised. So Microsoft is looking for leaked credentials in the darknet or using the Azure AD threat intelligence with various intelligence sources about information that probably the identity is compromised. But all of these events comes together in the user risk engine. And in the end, we've got a user risk score. And you can see in this graphic 2 symbols of conditional access. We will discuss that also in this session. But at the moment, it's only possible to use conditional access for specific automation response of a sign-in risk. User risk is currently not available as conditional access, but Microsoft announced that at last Ignite that they will introduce that also this year. And we have the option to respond to risk as part of the identity protection policies. And that is what I like to show you in a hands-on part now. So we switch over to the Azure Portal. And as you may already know, there's a new blade for all Azure AD related stuff that has a focus on security. And you can find also identity protection. And as I said before, it's a great idea to have the identity secure score in a regular review to have a feeling about your identity posture. And we have different policies. Each policy is similar from the specification, from the parameters that you can define here. So you have an assignment to the policy to users. You can define a level where the policy should be applied. In this case, that the user risk is high. And if the user risk is high, you can enforce action by identity protection, like block access, or you just allowing access after the user changed the password. And what kind of option do you choose depends on the configuration of Azure AD, because if you have no option for users unable to change the password in Azure AD, block access is the only way for a response. Or do you have any plans that users should have a teachable moment, which means the user calls the help desk or the IT security department to get in touch and discuss the security incident. So that depends really on what you like to do. Sign-in policy, sign-in risk policy defines once again the sign-in risk level that you can choose, and you have the option to block access once again or to force MFA so that the user confirm the sign-in by a strong authentication. Strong authentication means in this case the user has already registered MFA. So there's a third policy which allows users to register MFA in a time window of 2 weeks and then enforce the MFA registration. That's in general the policies, but more interesting, and I've prepared for the demo here some use cases. You can see some risky users in my tenant. We start with Jean-Luc Picard. John had some risk events in the past. You can see unfamiliar sign-ins, but also access from an anonymous IP address. And the risk level was defined by identity protection in the first event as medium, and afterwards increased to high. So the question is, why this increased to high? And if we go to risky sign-ins, we can see more details about the risky sign-ins. And in this scenario, we can see the risk level in real time and aggregated. And in the second risky sign-in, we can see that something in the offline detection has a result that the aggregation to risk level high was a result. So that is the reason why Jean-Luc has now a risk level of high and must change the password by next logon. But on the other side, we've got James T. Kirk. James T. Kirk has some, also risky events in the past, impossible travel, and a suspicious inbox mail manipulation rule. And in this scenario, the risk level is just set to low. And maybe it makes sense to have more investigation on Jean-Luc, because there's a reason maybe for that. Why he has some suspicious events. You can do some manually work here, like force the reset of a password, or to confirm that the user is compromised, or block the user until you have finished your investigation. But what we like to do here is to start the detailed investigation. And we can see here the investigation priority score that I described before. And this is really high. So really strange events that we can see here. And oops, okay. And if we go deeper, we can see that we have events like remote desktop sign-in. That's our events from Azure ATP. And if we go into details, we can see the first time log on this device. So that is a suspicious activity +4, so not really critical. More interesting is that we have a mass download event plus with a very high scale, and there's some other events also that we see here by MCAS that verified that we have an infrequently country access. But really interesting is that I have also some custom MCAS rules, like I've configured that access from non-company device, any download will be blocked. And we can see also details about the download, like the file name and what was the app that was used. And really interesting to see is here our event about the suspicious inbox manipulation, because have a look on the timestamp. The timestamp is here to 5:11 p.m. And if we go to identity protection, we can see here 9:13 p.m. So we have a huge delay of the event was forwarded back to identity protection, and the chance that identity protection can respond as part of a sign-in risk policy or user risk policy. And therefore, it's great that we have the option in MCAS to have a governance action. And we can see here that the alert triggered also some governance activities, like require users to sign in again or to suspend the user. So that helps really to have during the time, and especially for this certain risky session in MCAS, a response, and the user attack or the compromised session can be ended by requiring the sign-in once again. And the reason for that is you can set up policies, like here for a risky IP address. And in the policy, you can configure governance activities or actions like require user to sign in, but also to start further automation by Power Automate or Sender Alert or something else. So they're really powerful activity policies. And as we have seen with the downloading of files, it's also possible to build your own activities. If we go to alerts, we can see that also other sources like Azure ATP, with here the connector about Active Directory, can be used and have a single view of all identity alerts. But we have also an activity log, which gives you an overview about all activities to Azure, to MCAS, so to every platform that is supported in MCAS via the app connector. So in general, what we have seen here is it is very important in case of password authentication that we have an additional protection of authentication. So forcing strong authentication at every authentication is maybe one of the most efficient way to reduce identity risk. And there are several ways to provide strong authentication and passwordless options where users have not, I think, so the hard dealing like doing MFA by OTP via SMS. And Windows Hello for Business is a great way because you have your device, and mostly you can one user has one Windows device. So in my opinion, this is a perfect way if you have a relation one user to one device. And Windows Hello enables, if you like, to be in a single sign-on scenario in a hybrid environment. So you get refresh token, but also TGT for single sign-on in both worlds. So really cool options with Windows Hello. But if you have more mobile users that are using also non-Windows device, in my opinion, the Microsoft Authenticator app is also a great way to have a passwordless option. And in the end, with FIDO2 security keys, which is coming more and more popular by security keys, I think they're more great for user groups like admins or people that are using shared devices. Hybrid scenarios for that are also announced and in preview, so you have a same level of functionality like with Windows Hello. Okay, so that was our first subject. So however, a high-level view on that. But we will go deeper with conditional access, because if your users are enabled for passwordless authentication, you have a great way to increase your security and enforce strong authentication, because not only password is your primary your protection for access. And it's very important that you design your own baseline policies on your own needs. And it is great, I think, to start with a strong baseline policy. So maybe you like to split your users in groups like hybrid users or the normal work accounts, privilege identities, which are mostly cloud-only accounts, and you have external users, so users that are invited by Azure AD B2B. And you have different apps, maybe also with different protection level. And by designing policy, it is very great way to define or think about your environment, because you have to consider what types of devices do you have, because if you have only Windows devices, you can maybe block Mac as a condition for device access. And also build level of protection, because collaboration platforms maybe are open for your external users. But if you have a critical business app, which is only be used by the board members, so you can add some additional controls by conditional access. But with increasing of the numbers of policies, it's more important than ever that you have a naming convention in place. So there's a recommendation by Microsoft how you can build a naming convention, and it is maybe a way to think about a naming convention, how conditional access policies will be written. So please keep in mind that conditional access define a response, do this, to an access condition when this happens. And in my opinion, that's the perfect description or combination of this definition represents in the end a conditional access policy. So start maybe with a serial number, like your short name of tenant, in this case, Cloud Architect, it's the tenant name, and a serial number, and afterwards the scope, like a cloud app, and then this description of the conditional access. Because the serial number is really helpful in cases you have trouble with a conditional access policy, and like to talk with a colleague about that. And you take the call and say, okay, I've got troubles with policy CA01. It's much easier than singing the whole conditional access name. And there are more and more other cool things around conditional access, like the announcement from the Ignite last year, that we have the option with Microsoft Graph API to automate the deployment of conditional access policies. And I can strongly recommend it to check out the GitHub project by Alexander Philippine. He's working on a project with automation and some policy sets that he faced in his projects. And I think they're a great quick start to check out how you can implement conditional access. But let's have a deeper look on conditional access, and we switch back to the Azure Portal. And in the Azure Portal, once again, with Azure AD Security, you find your fast way to the conditional access policies. I will increase a little bit the size. And here you can see that I have a couple of conditional access policies. Whoops. And unfortunately, there's no option to sort or filtering policies, but you can use the process search. You can see I've got some policies that are effective for all users, like blocking legacy authentication is very important because that's the most reason for a successful password spray attacks. But if you please consider that applying or assign policies for all users have some side effects and should be chosen carefully, because you should exclude your directory synchronization service principals or your user for that, and also manage some exclusion security groups if you have trouble and has to add some users to that, and especially your emergency access accounts should be also excluded from such kind of policies. But if you exclude break glass in such baseline policies, you must be aware that you have a monitoring for this particular account, and exclusions for other conditional access policies should be also monitored, maybe using Azure AD Access Review to see if there are still needed to be a part of this exclusion. And we've got some other policies, like in this case, I require that a device must be joined, hyper-joined, or if there's no hyper-join, the user must authenticate by MFA. And if the user is coming from a device which is a non-company device, but he has using MFA, I will monitor and restrict the access by MCAS. So what we've seen in the last demo that I'm really restrict the session, so no download is possible. This is also a kind of resiliency strategy, because if you have trouble with your devices and you need access for some users, you have also a plan B and option that access, even if it's very limited, is still possible. If you talk about privilege identities, I've got also some policies, and you can see for privileged users, I always require MFA. And also limit the session control. And we can see here that I assigned this policy to directory roles. But please keep in mind that Microsoft adding sometimes new roles, and there's no assignment to all directory roles, so you should regularly check that. And in case if you are using PIM like I do, you should think about protecting those accounts before they request their roles. So I built some security groups that they protected before they are privileged. And if you like to design new policies, I really prefer to check with what if, how I will define the conditions and the design. And after I use what if like a simulator, I can set up the policies in report only mode. And with the report only mode, I'm able to have a policy without the enforcement. So we can see that here in this scenario. I checked some sign-in events here from the last 7 days that are accessing Azure Portal in Germany, and used sign-ins from Jean-Luc Picard. And I can see here in the sign-in reports which conditional access policies are applied. But I'm seeing also with the tab report only what could be happen if the policy is enabled and enforced. And in this case, the assignment will be affected, Jean-Luc, and in this access to Azure Portal also. I'm seeing here also the conditions about device and source IP. And in the end, that would be blocked by the conditional access policy. So report only helps you really as a staging. So if you're creating new conditional access policies, my recommendation, starting with what if, then creating the policy, check what would be happen by the report only mode, and afterwards staging the deployment by several rings, similar to the Windows update rings for such changes. And what is also really great about conditional access, we can see here workbooks. Workbooks are very helpful to understand the behavior of your conditional access policies. Like this, conditional access insights and reporting gives you an overview about the status. So what policies were successful or failed or not applied. So you get a feeling about your policies will be, is there any problem, or are they many users have trouble with authentication because you have a misconfigured policy? And with sign-in failures, you have a deep insight about maybe reasons for failures. And in this example, you see that I've got these numbers of total sign-ins, but more failure events than success events. And if we go deeper, we can see that many users' requests were be blocked because there was an account logout. And in nearly every situation that you can see that is the reason for that someone started a password spray attack. And here we can see that many of those number attacks are based on the legacy authentication. So that's a traditional password spray attack. And we can see here that, yeah, various users, there was a huge attack on specific users, but we can see that we have many events, and as I said before, the logout policy applied. But what was it? What is the password protection or smart logout in this scenario? Because in this case, password spray attack was blocked by the smart logout. And smart logout is very essential to log out bad actors who are trying to guess your passwords, your users' passwords. And you are able to increase the price for such password spray attacks, because smart logout will be block sign-in requests from the certain IP address after 10 attempts for a minute. And this also slowed down brute force attacks. And comparing to good old Active Directory, it's not affecting the whole user account. It's more blocking temporarily the source of the access or the sign-in attempts. And if you're using PDA for authentication, keep in mind your logout policy on premises, because there could be some side effects if they are not configured or considered the numbers of thresholds for the logout. And it makes me even more sense to increase the quality of passwords, because password spray attacks are mostly successful if the user chooses passwords like summer 2020, and you have the chance to validate password changes to the global banned password list by Microsoft, which blocks such weak passwords, but also to add own custom words to this list. So slang words from your local area, like here in the Rhine area with Alaf, Kolch, more local words that are also blocked, or maybe to block COVID 2020 as password could be also an idea. So we have seen some approaches to get a unified view on investigation of identity threats. We see identity protection, Azure ATP, but also with workbooks, insights about sign-in failures. But let's have a look on all components and services, how they play together in the Microsoft ecosystem, and how you can provide your identity SecOps unified view. And as I said at the beginning of the session, it's very important, especially if you have hybrid identities, to increase the security not only in the Azure AD environment, but also in Active Directory. Because we have talked about password protection, and Azure AD password protection is also possible to install on a domain controller. So if the user changed the password in the cloud or within your on-premises environment, you have also the validation against the banned password list. So keep in mind that hybrid identity means protect AD and Azure AD, and around that you have your guards, your protection for your hybrid identity environment with MCAS, identity protection, and Azure ATP. And if we have a look on how the sources of audit logs and alerts are located, we've got Azure AD with the sign-in logs, we have Azure ADP with some alerts, MCAS, but we have also on the left side infrastructure related stuff like for your Azure resources audit activity files and the Azure Security Center. And maybe you will protect your non-Azure resources, for example, in on-premises environment as well with Azure Security Center. And we have seen that MCAS has a kind of unified identity view, because with the user page and the investigation scoring, we have a view across these sources. And we have the option for automation, like with Power Automate or the activity policy governance actions. And unfortunately, not every Azure Security threat alerts will be forwarded to MCAS. And Office 365 ATP will be also not forwarded to MCAS. And we have for that special portals like the Security Compliance Portal. We have for every endpoint protection signal, the NDATP portal. And Microsoft understands that we have too much portal to have a view on the security. And therefore, they built Microsoft Threat Protection as a chance to have a unified view on your security services around the Microsoft 365 workloads. And that's a powerful way with MTP to do also some advanced hunting, because you can use KQL, which is really the language for queries around security and operations in Microsoft Cloud. But on the left side, we've got the monitoring in Azure, because infrastructure components are not forwarded to MTP, and also maybe you have third-party cloud services. They are not included in MTP. And that's the reason why Azure Sentinel could be interesting for you, because this gives you a really single pane of glass, and you have on top of your log analytics environment, maybe you use that already for scenarios. You get the chance for analytics, for threat hunting. We can use logic apps for automation. And in my opinion, Sentinel have three major benefits. So you have a unified view and a great option for automation. And there are also some built-in detections. And it's also based on KQL. And you are able to keep your audit and sign-in logs, for example, from Azure AD for a self-defined retention time. And third, you have the option for integrate third-party environments like Google, AWS. There are currently some disadvantages like limitations of connector for MTP and Office 365 message tracking. So keep that in mind. But I think if we talk about the benefits for identity, we can see hunting is a great way to have a view, maybe for new locations that we will use by sign-ins, or to have correlation between your Cisco firewall and your Azure AD logon. And as I said before, automation is the key. So not only automate your investigation to enrich your security alert, you have also some samples that are available in the GitHub repo about response to incidents, like, for example, revoke the Azure AD sign-in session. And what I like to show you now in my last hands-on part are some insights in Azure Sentinel, because we have seen great use cases about identity threats. And one of the things that I like to show you first is we've got some nice workbooks like this one, which gives the identity SecOps a nice overall view about sign-in events, audit events. And we can see, as I said before, go back to a long time. And if we go 30 days, we can see that I've got a really nice number of failed events by password self-service. That was one of the things that I said, if you like to use SSPR, you should consider how you protect them. And if we go to incidents and go also back some days, whoa, I get many security incidents, and we have seen a high number of self-service password requests, events that failed. So I'm looking for SSPR. And here I've got written an own KQL statement that are looking for suspicious activities, so that someone is using SSPR or try to reset as the password by a suspicious or risky IP address. And if I go to the investigation graph, I can see that Jean-Luc Picard, one of our victims in the hands-on, is also affected by this incident. And I can go and see further events. And if we see all the events from the past, like unfamiliar sign-in from identity protection, I see also additional incidents, like a brute force attack that is detected. This is one of the built-in detections by Sentinel. But we can go even further with some events like activity from a Tor IP address, which is also coming from MCAS. And if I go to the further investigation, I can see that the Tor IP address is the same like in this attack scenario of SSPR. So the investigation graph gives you a great way to go deeper in your in analyzing and hunting your environment. And if we choose other things like password spray, that was one of the things that we see in the workbooks. There's also detection on Azure Sentinel's GitHub repository that helps you to create an incident in case of a password spray attack. And I like to show you at least one sample about a really complex scenario, because we've seen a brute force attack or pass the hash attack. And in this scenario, we can see that CL3 as a virtual machine was included in this brute force attack on premises. And if we go to related alerts, we can see also events from Azure Security Center, like detected anti-malware. And really interesting in this alert is we can see that this happens from the user profile of James T Kirk. And if we go from Sentinel here to check who's logged on, who's using this device, we can see James T Kirk is using this device. So we can build a relation between all the suspicious activity by James T Kirk and this attack on-prem. Unfortunately, I can not investigate here further, because in this scenario, Azure ATP is using the display name as the account name. But if I'm investigate based on the IP address and go even further with my investigation, I can see here the entity of James T Kirk. And if I'm clicking on that, unfortunately, there is a mismatch in the account name of how Sentinel works between these usernames, so display name and the UPN. But really helpful is that you have a timetable and check how was the history of the whole event. I hope Microsoft will fix that in the future. Okay, so I hope that you enjoyed the session. I think it was a really wide range of topics, and I hope you find something new about identity security. In addition, you have the chance to get one more takeaway, so check out the raffle to win this cool gadget. And there's one more thing that I'd like to address. The community thought, in my opinion, is about sharing and participation. So this shall apply in particular of times of crisis, like in the current situation in the world. So please consider to support, or please support these two things, the two charity options like United Way and the International Medical Corps. And I think we look all forward to the time when we have the opportunity to go to conferences and meet in person. So don't forget to mark your calendars for on-site conferences next year. Rebranded Microsoft 365 collaboration, for example, is scheduled for March 2021. And yeah, feel free to get in touch with me if you have further questions. I don't know if we are just in time, but otherwise we have the opportunity to answer some questions now.
Yeah. Well, great session, Thomas. Good stuff.
Thanks.
And yeah, I would be still ask the attendees to post questions. We have 1 or 2 minutes, so maybe there's one quick question that we could answer. And maybe Thomas will stick around a couple of minutes to answer a question that you might have. So please feel free to send any questions you might have. And otherwise, I see all kinds of ways that you can engage with Thomas on Twitter and even by email. So
traditional ways, yeah.
Be ready for some questions in your mailbox.
You can send also postcards.
Yeah. So great stuff. There's a 30 to 40 second delay, so I'm just talking a little bit to see if a question comes in. So what's your favorite part of the technology you just demonstrated? What do you like best? What is the coolest thing there?
I think MCAS, because MCAS has some really nice detections, and but I really like also Azure Sentinel because you can build your own security defense around that.
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah. Yeah, it's Sentinel is well. It's the intelligent part of it, and of course it's a relatively new platform, but so much things are now getting integrated. I think.
So we're cloud native, so really built up from the ground.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Microsoft is really doing some very cool stuff here. Yeah, interesting space to be in at this moment. And of course, security is very much needed. All right. It seems that we're not getting any additional questions, so your story must have been very clear. That's great. So I would like to thank you again. And well, hope to see you in a live event in the near, not so much future.
Yeah, that will be great. And thanks for your help and the moderation.
Happy to do so. Have a great day.